Viktor Orbán and Giorgia Meloni have just stunned Brussels with a move so calm, so deliberate, that it rattled the entire European establishment. The real shock wasn't what they did. It was how easily they did it. Brussels can survive endless committees, emergency summits, and billion-euro crises. But two leaders thinking independently? That triggers a full-scale emergency. These are the moments that reshape Europe faster than headlines can track. When news of Orbán and Meloni's coordinated maneuvers spread across the globe, Brussels scrambled for explanations. EU officials reacted like they had just discovered a trapdoor beneath the negotiating table. And honestly, who can blame them? For years, the Brussels elite comforted themselves with two assumptions. Orbán was a distant nuisance. Meloni was a manageable novice. They were wrong, completely wrong. This time, both leaders entered the halls of power with a unified message that shattered the usual choreography. Europe is no longer a monologue. The era of quiet compliance is officially over. To understand why this matters, you have to understand how the European Union normally operates. Summits are scripted like bad theater. Statements are polished until they mean nothing. Dissent is treated like a fire alarm, something to silence immediately. Everything must appear smooth, predictable, and perfectly aligned. Orbán has long refused to play by this script, but Meloni's presence changes everything. When Italy, a founding member, a G7 economy, a nation too big to bully, steps onto the same stage as Hungary, the performance turns into something else entirely. A political earthquake disguised as polite conversation. What terrified Brussels most wasn't noise or drama, it was silence. Their message wasn't delivered with threats or outrage, but with the cold confidence of leaders who understand the winds in Europe are shifting. The symbolism alone hit harder than any speech. Standing together, they represented what the establishment fears most, not rebellion, but normalization. The realization that national sovereignty is becoming mainstream again. And once something becomes normal, Brussels can no longer dismiss it as fringe thinking. They are forced to listen. Rome is a city that remembers power the way stone remembers footsteps. Empires have risen and fallen there. So when Meloni welcomed Orbán to the Palazzo Chigi, this wasn't a routine diplomatic appointment. It was a message carved into political marble. The future of Europe is no longer dictated exclusively from Brussels or Berlin. Italy, long treated as the emotional, fiscally irresponsible younger sibling of the EU, has just declared itself a new center of gravity, a place where decisions are not merely accepted, but formed. Behind closed doors, the conversation wasn't wrapped in vague platitudes. They went straight for Europe's raw nerves: migration, energy, national autonomy, budget flexibility, and the question no one in power wants to ask out loud. Has Brussels drifted so far from its citizens that it no longer hears them? Meloni is not calling for a centralized, federal Europe run entirely from Brussels. Instead, she proposes something far more disruptive, moving beyond the outdated debate of more Europe versus less Europe. That phrase is diplomatic code for a radical shift. Orbán and Meloni stripped away bureaucratic varnish. They weren't speaking to committees. They were speaking directly to voters living with policies written hundreds of kilometers away. Take migration, the continent's open wound. Italy has carried the crushing Mediterranean burden for years, while others offered solidarity through press releases instead of solutions. Hungary built its political identity around border control and sovereignty, earning scorn from liberal elites. But when Italy and Hungary converge on migration, it stops being symbolic. It becomes strategic. Their argument is brutally simple. A union that cannot control its borders cannot claim to represent its citizens. Brussels calls this divisive rhetoric. Millions of Europeans call it accurate. Energy became the next battlefield. Europe is trapped between global instability and its own idealism. Nations feel squeezed between dependency and green ambition. Orbán insisted on energy autonomy long before it was fashionable, even when criticized for it. Meloni understands diversification is survival. Together, they challenge Brussels' centralized energy doctrine, arguing for policies shaped by geography, resources, and economic reality. This isn't rebellion, it's realism, and realism spreads fast. Then comes the Atlantic factor. With the return of Donald Trump to the White House, the global calculus changes overnight. Trump rewards strength and self-interest. He punishes indecision and bureaucratic paralysis. For Orbán and Meloni, this isn't a threat, it's an opportunity. They are reframing their stance not as EU disobedience, but as adaptation to a new global language: power, interests, and sovereignty. Suddenly, questioning Brussels doesn't look reckless. It looks ahead of the curve. The old formula, Germany leads, Brussels decides, everyone else follows, is breaking down. Germany faces stagnation and internal turmoil. France is weighed down by debt and unrest. Into this vacuum steps a coalition of states tired of being lectured: Italy, Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, the Czech Republic. They want more than symbolism. They want structural power. And here's the most unsettling part for Brussels. None of them are talking about leaving the EU. No flags burned. No exit letters written. They want something far more dangerous: to stay and reshape the hierarchy from within. They aren't breaking the system. They are breaking who controls it. And that terrifies Brussels more than Brexit ever did. When Orbán and Meloni posed for that photo in Rome, the story wasn't the handshake. It was the silent declaration behind it. The future of Europe will no longer be written by unelected committees. It will be written by nations taking back their voice. Like it or not, the rewrite has already begun.